8 years have passed since September 11th, 2001. Although the World Trade Center is slowly being rebuilt, the family members and survivors are far from rebuilding the lives which were shattered on that fateful day. The 9/11 Commission, the official investigation into what happened, published its findings and closed its doors 3 years prior. Yet questions still remain in the minds of many. What could drive so many people to continue to question such a tragic event? The events of 9/11 were used to shape the Bush administration's entire foreign and domestic policy. If the details of the events are proven to be a lie, then the authenticity of the Bush administration's entire tenure should be in question. So we're going to take another look at September 11th, beginning with those reportedly responsible for the attacks. By the afternoon of 9/11, Osama bin Laden was officially being blamed for the attacks, though a number of international figures would question the United States version of events, including Egyptian President Mubarak and General Hamid Gul, the former head of Pakistani intelligence, who stated that 9/11 was pulled off by the Israeli intelligence service. On September 16th, bin Laden officially denies responsibility on Al Jazeera television. Regardless, Bush claims he wants bin Laden dead or alive, and the CIA is dispatched to Afghanistan to bring back his head in a box. On December 13th, 2001, the Department of Defense releases a videotape allegedly discovered in a house in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden discusses the attacks, but does not take responsibility. American mainstream media and even President Bush would portray this videotape as absolute proof of his guilt, even though the translation was not conducted by a third party and was instead provided by the Department of Defense. International establishments and many others question the legitimacy of the tape.
Ich habe die Übersetzung des Pentagons sorgfältig überprüft. Diese Übersetzung ist sehr problematisch. Sie ist an den wichtigsten Stellen, die Täterschaft bin Ladens beweisen sollten, nicht identisch mit dem arabischen Ton.
In a video aired on Al Jazeera 3 days before the 2004 presidential election, bin Laden reportedly claims responsibility for 9/11 for the first time. Al Jazeera does not say how they received the tape. The final bin Laden video was released in 2006. Does anyone else see a problem here? Osama bin Laden has never been captured or officially convicted for September 11th, 2001. Although audio tapes attributed to him are occasionally released, as of this date, he is considered dead by most. As for the hijackers, the 19 hijackers were painted as radical Muslims, sneaking into the United States without any problem and raising zero suspicion as to what they were planning. First, they were not devout Muslims spending their last days preparing for paradise. In the months and weeks before the attacks, some of the hijackers are spotted several times at strip clubs and make several unexplained trips to Las Vegas. They drink heavily, receive lap dances, buy sex toys, and sleep with prostitutes, spending thousands of dollars within hours. The 9/11 Commission claims that the United States only knew of 3 hijackers prior to the attacks: Nawaf al-Hamzi, Salem al-Hamzi, and Khalid al-Midar. For starters,
Al-Kai Collins says he was paid $2,500 a month as an FBI informant in Phoenix. In a stunning disclosure to ABC News, he claims that 3 years before September 11th, he began providing the FBI with information about Hani Hanjar, a young Saudi who later helped fly hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 into the side of the Pentagon. They knew he lived in Phoenix. They knew his phone number. They knew his
address. They knew what he drove. They knew everything there was to know about the guy.
The FBI emphatically denies that Collins provided any information about Hani Hanjour, but they do admit that they paid Collins to monitor the Islamic and Arab communities of Phoenix because of his unusual background. Once in Phoenix in 1996, the FBI asked Collins to focus on a group of young Arab men, many of whom were taking flying lessons. Hani Hanjour was part of the group.
They drank alcohol, they messed around with girls and stuff like that. They all lived in an apartment together, Hani and the others.
Collins said he provided the FBI with basic facts, letting the FBI take it from there.
2 of the hijackers even lived with an FBI informant in San Diego and were visited by Hani Hanjour and Mohammed Atta. Finally, an intelligence unit by the name of Able Danger claimed to have identified Mohammed Atta and 3 other hijackers 2 years before 9/11. The Department of Defense and White House, of course, officially deny it. FBI Director Robert Mueller claimed that the hijackers gave no hint to those around them what they were about. However, this turns out to be far from the truth.
Shortly after Atta arrived in the country, he tried to get the U.S. government to essentially finance his plot, seeking a loan from the Department of Agriculture. Janelle Bryant is the USDA loan officer in Homestead, Florida, who Atta approached in May of 2000. Bryant says it was this television commercial about how to borrow money from the government that led Atta to the USDA office, seeking $650,000 for what he described as crop dusting.
He wanted to finance a twin-engine, 6-passenger aircraft and remove the seats. And he said he was an engineer, and he wanted to build a chemical tank that would fit inside the aircraft.
Bryant turned Atta down, but she spent more than an hour with him, talking, she says, of bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and targets. She says Atta became fixated with the aerial photo of Washington on her office wall.
He pulled out a wad of cash about that big around and started throwing money on my desk. He wanted that picture really bad. He asked about the Pentagon and the White House and pointed them out.
He asked about the Pentagon?
Yes, sir, he did. In fact, he picked out where the Pentagon was.
Bryant says Atta also asked her about security at the World Trade Center and what she knew of Chicago, Seattle, and Los Angeles.
Hijacker Hamza El-Ghamdi had a flight booked for later on the day of 9/11, and 2 after 9/11, 1 from LA to San Francisco, and 2 within Saudi Arabia. The complexities of the alleged hijackers are far and wide. We can only begin to scratch the surface here. They even managed to find hijacker Satam al-Sukami's passport, perfectly intact, on a sidewalk before the South Tower's collapse. Is it possible that the hijackers were merely patsies in a scheme much larger than themselves or Osama bin Laden?
Be careful where we stay on a loop, because these are being recorded and these tapes will be handed over. Everybody copy that? I'm glad I'm not flying today. Don't worry, Jim. We'll carjack you on the way home.
Between September 2000 and June 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would send fighter jets to intercept errant aircraft 67 times. Interceptions were routine and usually occur within 10 minutes of a sign of trouble, such as losing radio contact and transponder signal or flying off course. On September 11th, we are told that 4 commercial airliners were off course and out of communication, and not one of them could be intercepted.
Never did in anybody's thought process about how to protect America did we ever think that the evildoers would fly not 1, but 4 commercial aircraft into precious U.S. targets. Never.
Steve, I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are big questions about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross.
One of the drills executed prior to September 11th was called Amalgam Virgo. It was conducted in the beginning of June 2001 and simulated a series of successful terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats like the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the capital. One part of the exercise involved a Haitian AIDS victim who makes a deal with the Colombian drug cartel to crash a private jet into Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida in order to secure funding for AIDS patients. They even wrote up a suicide note for him. NORAD would deliver scripted messages from the FBI to controllers participating in the war games. And guess who was on the proposal's cover? Osama bin Laden. The second part of the exercise, which was planned before 9/11 but not executed until 2002, involved 2 Delta planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents hijacked the planes and diverted them to secure locations. The FBI claims it has no records regarding this exercise. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself. But before we cover those, on the morning of September 11th, President Bush was in Florida to promote an education policy. At approximately 8:30 a.m., he left his hotel and headed for Booker Elementary School in Sarasota. Before entering the building, he was aware a plane had struck one of the Twin Towers. In fact, Bush claimed more than once that he saw the first strike live on television. This is impossible, unless President Bush saw something the public has not. Video of the first strike was not broadcast until later that evening. Minutes after Flight 175 strikes the South Tower, Chief of Staff Andrew Card leans into President Bush's ear, whispering and walking away. And President Bush continues to listen to My Pet Goat. Despite the fact that both Twin Towers had been hit and another plane was in the air and suspected to be hijacked, he remained at the school